Hi, today I want to talk to you about transferring the drawing from piece of paper to piece of lino. So what I do is to draw on paper and make a tracing, and I do that because it allows me to reverse the image. Now there are loads of ways of transferring an image onto a piece of lino. People have different methods, so I'm just going to tell you what I use. So what I do is to make a tracing on tracing paper. Now in this instance I've taken the tracing on two pieces of tracing paper, and that's partially because it allows me to move the image about, and I quite often use the stage where I make a tracing to do a bit of editing. So I might move the tracing paper around to shift objects in the image, or I might redraw slightly as I take the tracing. So my tracing of the tree, for example, you can see there's a lot more detail in that tracing than there is in the original drawing. So it's another stage in my endless editing and correcting way of working. So I have got it on these two bits of tracing paper. Now this is nothing fancy. The tracing paper I use is made by this manufacturer, and there are two weights of it that I've found. There's a 40 gram and a 90 gram. To be honest, either's fine. The 90 gram's a bit more sturdy, but you know, there's nothing in it. So the thing about tracing paper like this is that it is susceptible if it gets wet. So if you are like me and a bit prone to put cups of tea in the wrong place or anything like that, it will swell and buckle. The other thing about it is that if it's in a damp place, it can change shape slightly. Now for lino cut, where all you're doing is taking a tracing, transferring it to lino, and that's the end of the tracing paper's job, it honestly doesn't matter that much, and paper is absolutely fine. If I'm using a tracing where I'm going to have to refer to that tracing for registration, like I do in Japanese woodblock, then I use something slightly different. And here is a big tracing to show you. This stuff is plastic. It's a plastic film. It looks like tracing paper and it behaves like tracing paper, except that because it's plastic, it doesn't change shape, it doesn't buckle, it doesn't swell if the conditions are damp. And this stuff is called Polydraw, the one that I use, and it's 050 is the weight that I use, and that works very well. It is expensive. But if you feel like your drawing is really important, that it doesn't get damp and it doesn't change size, then I would go for the plastic tracing film every time. So, I mean, I have to say, my Japanese woodblock, the registration, which relies on the tracing, is so much better now that I've switched to plastic tracing film, but not so critical for lino transfer. So that's Polydraw. So to transfer the tracing onto the lino, I use carbon paper. So I'm using office carbon paper, this stuff here, and the brand that I use is this one, but there are lots out there. It's a bit hit and miss. Some of the carbon papers can be a bit feeble. What I would say is better to spend a little bit more money on your carbon than to buy the bargain basement ones, which tend to be a little bit weak when you come to transfer. So this one actually happens to be double-sided. There isn't a right side or a wrong side to this. And I have a little sample of lino, which I've stained, like I showed you in the video about lino. So I've got one here, and this already has some carbon on it. And I'll explain why in a second. So I'm just going to put another batch of carbon on it. So let me move this out of the way. So if I was going to trace a design, I would have a design on my tracing paper. I just put my carbon on my lino, take my tracing paper, and then I would transfer my design, like so, onto the carbon. So now I have two bits of drawing on my lino, and the reason I've done that is to show you that it is really important that you let the carbon set on the lino once that you've drawn it, and ideally overnight, at least for a few hours. And the reason for that is because you don't want it to transfer onto your print. Now, I'm talking all the way with this series of films about using oil-based inks, not water-based inks. So with water-based ink, the carbon transfer problem is actually a bit worse. But with oil-based ink, if you use fresh carbon and just print straight away, you will get some transfer. But if you clean your block with white spirit to get rid of excess carbon before you print, you won't get carbon transfer. However, if you clean with white spirit and the carbon hasn't set to the lino, you'll just clean it off. So let me just show you that. So I've got some white spirit here and some paper towel, and I am just going to have a little go at cleaning this. So this one here has set overnight and I'm just cleaning off the excess. This one here I've just put on. So neither will transfer onto the lino now that I've done this. You can see how it's taken the excess of the stain and the carbon off. This won't transfer, and that one's not even there to transfer. So let your carbon set before you use it, before you clean it off and get ready to print. So once it's been cleaned with the white spirit, then you can print, and you won't get pink on your print and you won't get the carbon on the print. So finally, let me show you our original picture transferred to the lino. Now, I have also added a bit more to the drawing since I showed it to you last. So move that out of the way. So here is the transferred drawing with a load of paint on it. Now, in the next video, I want to talk to you about ways of marking the lino, things that you can use to draw and to give you different textures on lino, and paint is one of them, so we'll be talking about that. But the final thing I want to say to you is that when you are doing carbon transfer onto your lino for printing, remember you need to turn your tracing over and put it face down to the lino. So when you look at the lino and you look at the drawing, let me show you here, the lino is a mirror image of your drawing. If you do that, when you do your print, it will come out the right way around. It sounds really obvious when you think about it, but it's easy to forget. So just remember the tracing goes face down onto the carbon paper so that you can transfer it the right way around to print. So next video, we'll talk about mark making on lino, and I hope you'll join me. Thanks a lot for listening.